Hi there, Dr. Bird here, ready to do a little story time. And yes, I am in my car, hopefully for the last time this month, on my way home, just a couple hours from home. So we'll get there soon. And again, grateful for the hotspot possibility with the phone. So I'm going to do my best to hold this still while I juggle that and the reading material. We're reading from Genesis 21 today. This is a passage that talks about Sarah having children in her old age and the treatment of family, and so we're going to get into that. Before I do, though, I do want to comment that yesterday I totally forgot to point out one of the more egregious and unfortunate pieces of the whole women are so obviously not seen as fully human comments, that because I was focused so much on the issue of trying to talk about what the sin of Sodom, or the sin of Sodom actually was. Several of you commented, which is great. Yeah, the very beginning, the whole town surrounds the house, all the men of the town. So when saying all the every single person is analogous to saying all the men, women don't actually count as people. This is also an issue that is still going on in the Newer Testament, by the way. It's not like it's just a Hebrew Bible issue. So the whole Bible, right? Women are absolutely positively second-class humans. Second, like not even fully human the way men are. Yeah, we got to talk about that, because this is one little line points to this significant issue. And then all of the stories that we see or read are playing out what that looks like, right? Men speaking between men about women's bodies, men bartering women's bodies, right? Men having these conversations or power dynamics and connections or long-term covenants with each other through the use of women's bodies, or as we saw in chapter 17, the mutilation of men's bodies, interestingly enough. So we're gonna. So I wanted to highlight that. Appreciated that some people pointed that out, and I was focused on the sex piece, which is why I forgot to point it out when I went back through. So anyway, the reason I'm doing this series, again, for those of you who maybe this is the first one you've seen, or just a quick reminder because you have other things going on in your life or whatever. I'm wanting to talk about the biblical passages that touch on sex, the relationships we refer to as marriage, and physical harm that involves genitalia in some way, shape, or form. So I don't like the phrase sexual abuse, because sex is a positive thing in my world and abuse is not. And so putting those together just doesn't make sense to me. So that's why I kind of do this elongated, drawn out description of rape or sexual, right? See, I can't, I'm very well trained by it. The physical abuse involving intimate body parts. Why I'm doing this, first of all, I'm doing it for a couple of reasons. One, I'm marriage in the Bible. What does the Bible actually say about marriage is kind of my jam right now. And I have written a book, and we're in the process of getting it out into the world. And I care. The thing is, I care about when people are influenced by these ancient texts still in their own lives today. I care about it because even people who mean very well, right? People of faith want this to be a positive thing for their lives, and they turn to it for guidance. And without being conscious of all of these potentially negative components, right? Then it's a lot easier to perpetuate those negative dynamics in your relationships if you're not aware of it to begin with, right? And then, so taking some time to actually just look at what's going on in these texts, even though they're really important to people, they are also still a little bit separate from us. And so being honest about that can then help us to then become a little bit more aware of how and when we see it in our lives. And calling these sacred texts to account essentially is important to me because of that. Okay. So that's why I'm doing this. It's not just look at all these awful things in the Bible. I know that the Bible is important to people. And here are some things I'd like people to think about. These elements in the midst of whatever you do with these texts in general, these are also elements. And I really want us to be taking that seriously. If we're getting this from cover to cover, we're getting writings from people who just take one piece of this whole conversation, legitimately think of women as lesser than men in terms of their value, their voice, their presence, their whatever. Men think of women as not actually fully human in the way that men are. We're getting that from cover to cover in this thing called the Bible. Let's pause and reflect on the many ways that is then going to play out in all the claims within those same writings, for better and mostly for worse. Okay, so we're on to chapter 21 of Genesis today, and let's just get into it. I'm going to pause as we go through it instead of. Somebody said, can we talk about video games and skate parks? Yes and no. You can talk about that all you want. I'm trying. Do I see the overlap? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I see your point for sure. Yes. Yeah. I can't even start thinking about video games right now because it's just so multi-layered, right? The objectification and anyway. So we're going to talk about Genesis 21. The Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, which was, there was a promise made that angels were going to come back a year later and Sarah was going to have a child, right? Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. I mean, we could just stop and reflect on this for a moment, right? Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son. Not she had a son that the two of them loved. It was their beloved child. No, she gave Abraham a son. Okay? Can we just be honest about that? All that is said in that, right? It was her role. It was Abraham's son. What the hell? And right, she gave him a son. Okay, I just don't think it plays out that way for the woman who's gestating and bringing that child, pushing that child to her vagina. I'm sorry, it's just more than just that, okay? It's her child. Okay, Abraham gave the name Isaac to his son whom Sarah bore him. Again, same thing, right? Abraham names the men name the children, right? He gave the name Isaac to his son whom Sarah bore him. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And as I had people point out to me very appropriately, I think the whole mutilation of an infant's skin is worth stopping to reflect on the appropriateness of that. I have never been in the place of a parent needing to make that decision in a Western culture, heavily influenced by Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, the monotheistic traditions, predominantly Christianity. And I see that this is a form of mutilation of a person's body that can't be undone. That's a really stark thing to just do. It's just pretty, got it, right? Just needed to note that, right? So Abraham did this to his son because it's the mark of the covenant. God told him to, according to the narrative. All right, there you have it. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Now, Sarah said, God has brought laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me, because the name Isaac comes from the verb to laugh, right? Excuse me. And she said, who would ever have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children at all, right? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. I mean, it's, you got to love it, hate it, love, hate, right? When women are depicted, at least, in fully embodying and embracing the patriarchal narrative and expectations of women, right? It's just a thing to comment on. There we go, right? The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on that day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. So Sarah said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son. For the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac. I don't know how much to get into on this, but I just, I want to highlight for people that Hagar is an enslaved person. We talked about it in chapter 16 when I read it, and but can we just be very honest about that and not just walk right past that? There's an enslaved person in their home. They forced her, Abraham rapes her, right? She brought the child into the world. By the way, I mean, women have known how to terminate pregnancies or know how to go about trying to terminate pregnancies as long as they've been bringing pregnancies to fruition. So, there are all these things we could talk about, but my point is she was raped and she had to bring that child into the world. And the way that child and she were treated is worth taking very seriously, and not just treating as secondary and not such a big deal the way that the narrative does, right? They get written off, it's a big deal for a moment, and then we never think about the beginning. You don't have to think about them very much at all, right? There are Ishmaelites in the storyline, but you don't really think about them very much. Yeah, I'm not as okay with that anymore. You know what I'm saying? This enslaved woman has been through it with them. Okay. Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac. Right? So, again, giving credence to the way that this culture said it was possible to claim this child that Hagar gave birth to as actually Sarah's and Abraham's. And there's a whole lot you can say about the inheritance system and the adopting of, or kind of claiming as your own, a child, and the way that all plays out. So there are many scholarly articles you can read along these lines. My intention is just to get you thinking about how complicated all of it is. I'm not trying to sort it all out definitively here. The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. You might want to ask which one. At this point in the story, are we actually still seeing Ishmael as his son? I think maybe, right? But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. I'm just reading the English translation here. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. So this is a shift, right? A little bit of a shift. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring. Isn't that lovely on some level to keep that going? And however problematic all at the same time, right? So what I'm interested in doing is trying to bring to your attention some elements of the story that I think traditional interpretation and commentaries try to ride right over. We're talking about an enslaved woman here named Hagar and the child that she was forced to have. And we're talking about disinheriting them, and that it's being, in a sense, it's being backed up by God, that Abraham is about to kick them out of the family, and God is saying, don't worry about doing that because they'll be okay on their own. I'm going to bless them too. But this whole move to disown them, even though they were forced into coming into being in the first place, right? All of these different things. And it's being legitimized by God. And it is through the Ishmaelites, right, that Muslims claim their heritage to Abraham. And some of these stories from Genesis are kind of rewritten in the Quran, or the tradition that goes along with it, is kind of rewritten in the Muslim tradition, understandably, I think. Anyway, let me keep going. So Abraham rose, so this claim being made by God to Abraham, I will make a nation of Ishmael also, because he is your offspring. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered out into the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, do not let me look on the death of the child. Who today can relate to this? I think my thought goes immediately to migrant workers, or to immigrants who are trying to get from one country to one that's meant to be safer for them, and they end up not having enough water as they cross the desert, and end up dying or leaving behind a family member who is dying, or something like that. The dire situation of this woman and her child, right, at this moment in time. As she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept, and God heard the voice of the boy. This narrative makes me giggle because I don't think it's quite, I think they got a little confused or something. The boy was crying, I guess, as he's dying or as he's dehydrated, he's crying out, or the woman is actually crying. Anyway, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is." Again. Anyway, "Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." End quote. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a woman for him from the land of Egypt, which would make sense given Hagar probably came from Egypt, right? According to the storyline. And I'm not going to read the next part because it's about men and these other things. It's not about the family and the sex and the stuff. So that's where we're going to leave it. This is a story about, we should have a bit of a conversation here, or monologue. Let's see. In the sorry about that. I'm trying to ask you all to think about what do we see about relationships? What do we, this relationship we call marriage? What do we see about what's happening with sex? So this isn't the sex directly as the result of it. So what are we seeing about the relationships we call marriage? And, people are having these conversations about polygamy or polyamory or open relationships, open marriages, and that kind of thing today, as has been happening over the centuries or whatever in various ways. But this is what is this? Is this this isn't polygamy, right? What Hagar is forced into is a situation she's forced into. She has been purchased, handled like property, is treated like property in the home she lives in. So she's even lower on the totem pole than Sarah is to Abraham. She's been forced Abraham forces himself onto her to get her pregnant. And then when they fix the problem themselves, when Sarah has her own child, we don't need you anymore, so we're going to throw you out with the trash. Oh, except you are Abraham. You did bring Abraham's child, so he's going to be blessed. Okay, we're going to have a nation of him. Okay, that's nice. What does this tell us about marriage, folks? What are we learning about the marriage of Abraham and Sarah here? What did we just see modeled for us in terms of communication between the two? What do we see about this element of trust? What do we see in terms of how Sarah's depicted? I mean, she's depicted being quite jealous, or I don't know if envious is the word, but she doesn't want her son inheriting with that boy, right? She doesn't want, is there not much inheritance, so she doesn't want it split? Is it this issue of a form of racism? All of the people here involved in this story, none of them are white-skinned, right? They're all some form of olive or darker skinned than that, from that part of the world. But it's still, Hagar's from a different group of people than they were originally according to the storyline. So is it an outsider issue? Is it that she was enslaved, so she's deemed lesser value, even if they all looked the same? And just on that alone, her child isn't worthy to be on the same ground as her child, right? I mean, for which reason is she upset that Isaac would be sharing the inheritance with Ishmael? For which reason is likely what's being depicted? Historically, what would have been likely? And it's also very convenient, right, that Sarah's the one who's upset about this, not Abraham, according to the narrative. It's convenient, whatever. So there are all kinds of things we could say about this. I just know that in particular in my upbringing and in my time, like up through seminary, I didn't give Hagar and Ishmael much of a thought. Because the storyline itself kind of teaches us not to pay too much attention to them, right? Or I should say, the way I'd handled it, the way it had been handled for me, modeled being handled for me, that it was barely a blip, and let's keep moving because now we have icing. That's all that matters, So as a biblical scholar who's trying to get people to take biblical texts way more seriously than you ever have before, right? Let's be deeply honest about this. This is a form of a marriage, and there's a woman in their midst who also brought a child into the world. There's procreating taking place within this home that is not a part of the marriage, okay? There is a woman with whom a man is having sex, and he is not married to her. This is the father of it all, okay? Like the guy who got the whole thing started for us. Sex outside of marriage legitimized the child himself is also, because he's from Abraham, gets to be a prince of nations. I mean, good for him, but I want you to think about this other piece that she is property. She is not one of his wives. And there is procreation taking place here outside of marriage. And we're treating this human and her child like property, like cattle that can be just sent out to fend on their own. Okay? That's marriage, biblically speaking. Right there. That's it. That's all I want to say for today. I'm getting really hot sitting here, and I want to keep moving. But let me just, yes, exactly. It's not one man, one woman, but it is. But it is, and it's not. It's not that whole one man, one woman that people say biblical marriage is. It's not. Procreation is for marriage. No, it's not. No, it is not.